everybody. Is it funny? Ow, I can see it says the Vogue Show and didn't mean to say that. Hello, this is the Bald Explorer, not the Vogue Show. I had to switch a few things around. Hope you are well. Sorry, itch on my eye. Welcome to another stream reading of J.B. Priestley's English Journey. And I have a cup of tea today to keep me going. Messages coming in. Fantastic. Now, I'm just a bit overexposed, which is not a good thing. So I'm just going to quickly adjust my exposure. There, that's a bit better, I think. We are on chapter 6. If I can find it in this book that is falling to bits, unfortunately. To the West Riding. I would love to know if anybody knows how. This is part of Yorkshire. You've got different South Yorkshire. Is it West Yorkshire? Or North Yorkshire? And West Riding. I'd love to know if anybody knows why it's called West Riding. I did read it once and I cannot remember. Just so you know, yesterday when I was on my bike, I pulled a muscle and I've got this pain here which twinges every now and again. I've had a bad night. I have managed to get out and do a vaguest of walks this morning. Desperately local to where I am because I could barely walk, but I shuffled around with my camera and I've made something which will go out tomorrow morning. Luckily, I have this afternoon's video, which is also on my bike, but with better sound and a different route. People seem to like it. I don't want to do too many of them all in one go, but I did do 2 videos yesterday with that. Sorry. Every time I move in a certain position, I just get a spasm. The key thing is to keep moving. I also seem to be losing my voice a little bit. It's a bit croaky this morning. I think I'm probably doing too much, but without any rest. But in this crisis, to me, it's important to just keep going. So please don't tell me off. People obviously they care about me, and people are telling me to ride helmets. They're telling me to fix cameras, not on the bike rather than in my hand, to stay in and don't go out. People do like to be prescriptive. And as somebody else on YouTube did say, you know, Richard is a grown-up. He can make up his own mind. He does have some common sense. And, you know, people want to be an uncle or an aunt to me. And I appreciate that. But I am very an independent person. Anyway, it is a Sunday morning and it's just gone 9:30. Oh, blimey, it's 9:36. This is chapter 6 to West Riding. Let's see how far we get with this one. Once again, I had to abandon the route I originally planned. I had promised to attend the first reunion dinner of my old Kitchener's Army Battalion, which was to take place in my native city, Bradford. So there was nothing for it but to visit the West Riding next, leaving the still unvisited potteries behind. This time I travelled from Nottingham to Yorkshire in my own car, being carried there like a precious parcel in a glass case. I used to drive myself, but have given it up for the last few years, not because I think myself too important to change my own gears, but simply because I'm a very bad driver. People who are downright bad drivers should not handle a motor these days, when the roads are so crowded and dangerous. They are a menace to other persons as well as to themselves. I think, as you are probably thinking, that it is disgraceful that a large adult male should not be able to drive a car decently. My own trouble is that I've become absent-minded at the wheel, and I'm not able to act quickly. The result is I run into things. Indeed, there are few things commonly met with on the road that I have not bumped into in my time. But it is still more disgraceful not to admit your incompetence, to go on driving when you know in your heart of hearts that any minute you might turn into a dangerous nuisance. Spend an hour on the road and you will see that there are any number of shockingly bad drivers about. But how often do you meet a man who can drive and who has driven for some time, but who admits that he's a bungler and a menace? I have met men who have never tried at all and do not intend to try. I have met men who have never tried at all and do not intend to try. But if a man has ever handled a car for a year or two, he will not admit that he is anything but supremely efficient. So they go on, as the statistics of killed and injured show us, dealing death in their vanity. There are, of course, various ways of making the road safer, but not the least important of them is a wholesale dismissal of bad drivers, probably 1 in every 3 motorists who now career up and down the country. The early afternoon was sunny but not warm, found us well outside Nottingham and making for Chesterfield. Somewhere about halfway we passed through the main street of a very small town, and each side of this street was lined with folk, old and young, who were all looking in one direction. Possibly there was a big funeral, or perhaps a wedding among notables, but there was no sign of either, and the staring crowd gave us no clue. It was very odd and rather disquieting to see all these faces and not know what was the matter. It was as if we were not really there, or, alternatively, as if we had gone rushing on into some mad England not on the map. To travel swiftly in a closed car, as so many of us do nowadays, is of course to cut oneself off from the reality of the regions one passes through, perhaps from any sane reality at all. Whole leagues of countryside are only a roar and muddle outside the windows, and villages are only like brick-coloured bubbles that we burst as we pass. Their life is temporarily as remote as the moon. For all I know, those staring people in that little town may have been expecting the signal for the world's end or the second coming. Their lives may also have been curiously transformed that my chauffeur and I, and our machine, were not present to their minds. Perhaps if we had stopped and got out, we might have been able to hold communication with them. All this is not mere fancifulness, a literary gent having his fun. Our new rapid, closed-in sort of travel has sinister aspects, and here is one of them. When people move slowly in their travel... Sorry, I'm not reading terribly well. I do apologise. When people moved slowly in their travel, there was time to establish proper communications with what was strange, to absorb and to adjust oneself. Now that we are whizzed about the world, there is no time for absorbing and adjusting. Perhaps it is for this reason that the... I'm going to have a slurp of tea and hope that I can actually stagger through it today. Bit of bad reading. Sorry about that. Perhaps it is for this reading that the world that the traveller knows is beginning to show less and less variety. By the time that we can travel at 400 miles an hour, we'll probably move over a dead uniformity, so that the bit of reality we're left at one end of the journey is the twin of the bit of reality that we stepped into at the other end. Indeed, by that time there'll be movement, but strictly speaking, no more travel. The fancy that we might be rushing on into some strange mad England, inspired by the sight of those staring people, returned to me a little later when we reached Chesterfield. I've often noticed its famous crooked spire from the train, but had never been so close to it before. It was startling. To begin with, it's much bigger than I had imagined it to be. Actually, it's 230 feet high. Then again, it is most grotesquely warped, twisted, crooked, the oddest, drollest tower in the country. It dominated the town and its narrow streets, but only in its own queer fashion, like an enormous antique jest. Sorry, I'm really struggling. It dominated the town and it dominated the town and its narrow streets, but only in its own queer fashion, like an enormous antique jest set forever in the skies. The people who live in its shadows ought to be folks out of the common. They ought to go careering about like the elvish burghers and peasants in old Bougel's enchanting pictures. They ought to be humorists. Every time the morning papers arrive in Chesterfield, roars of laughter ought to ascend to that black barley sugar stick of spire. For a moment I thought there was an air of cheerful madness about the place, welcomed it, and said to myself that England ought to be filled with such fantastic pieces of architecture to match its fantastic characters and books. Just as there is a grimly sane England that is really lunatic, so too ought there be, on a big scale, an apparently mad England, with towers all awry, that is really sane and sweet, like some of Shakespeare's comedies. Probably the old citizens of Chesterfield were annoyed when they saw what had happened when you build a lofty spire of wood and lead and do not use properly seasoned timber. But if they are not proud and fond of their spire now, they are poor creatures. Warped minds and hearts, these are our warped minds and hearts, these are our troubles, not warped spires. It doesn't matter into what twisted folly the architecture breaks, so long as we can live merrily and affectionately beneath it. And the more I see of this country, the more firmly I am convinced that it is not its cheerful fools, but its grimly practical, hard-headed men who have always been its chief sources of danger. With that mad spire to live under, Chesterfield ought to never have been allowed to enter industry. It should never have passed a dividend, never have come in sight of a double-entry bookkeeping, but ought to have been kept as a Derbyshire stronghold of cheerful English eccentricity, a fortress of pleasant folly, the last refuge for Cousin Silence, my Uncle Toby, and Mr. Micawber. Good morning. I hope everyone's doing well. Morning. Doing great. Thank you very much for the encouragement. Yes, just a bad start this morning. Sometimes, the eye is struggling and the text can often jump about. Between Chesterfield and Sheffield, where the fields are preserved in the place names and hardly anywhere else, the countryside looked very queer. Industrial man and nature sing a rum sort of duet in those parts. I saw a row of sharply conical little hills that looked like a topographical freak, until I came close to them and realised that they were old slag heaps, now almost entirely covered with grass. Further on, we passed a hill that might have been brought from another planet. It was black, where the low rays of sun were not faintly glinting it, and everywhere was deeply scarred and seamed. Not even passing through the mountainous Nevada, where the landscape is only so much geology, have I seen so strange and desolate a hill as this. Only, of course, nature had not been at work here, for this was really a colossal slag heap, the biggest I've ever seen. We were now drawing near to Sheffield. There was some fine high country on the left, good Pennine stuff. The sun was low, but still shining strongly, and with an increasing smokiness in the air. It made a strange... here's a word I don't know. Chiaroscuro. Here, somebody could look this one up for you. Here's a challenge. CHIAROSCURO. It's like chair, but with the A and the I swapped round. Cheruscro. I don't know. As northern as high T and the proper short A sound. As northern as high T. Don't get it. For one moment, Sheffield, far below, looked like the interior of an active volcano. The road ran along a ride. Down below, on the left, were rows and rows of little houses, acres of slanting and gleaming slates. We ran under a murky canopy and were in Sheffield. The smoke was so thick it made a foggy twilight in the descending streets, which appeared as if they would end in the steaming bowels of the earth. In the centre of the city was a large new white building that threw into darker relief its older neighbours. We were now in the true North Country. One glance at the people with their stocky figures and broad faces, humorous or pugnacious, told you that. On the road to Barnsley, the stone walls began, settling any possible doubts. The north of England is a region of stone walls. They run from the edges of towns to the highest and wildest places on the moors, firmly binding the landscape. You never see anyone building them or even repairing them, but there they are, unbroken and continuous from every tram terminus to the wilderness of bog and cloud. No slope is too steep for them, no place too remote. They will accurately define pieces of ground that do not even know a rabbit or only hear the cry of curlews. Who built these walls? Why were they ever thought of worth building? These are mysteries to me. But when I see them, I know that I'm home again, and no landscape looks quite right without them. If there were not a few thousand leagues of them framing the bright fields of asphodel, it would be no Elysium to me. Sorry, bit of pain here. Anybody worked out what that word was? Morning, John Blake. Good morning. Sunday evening in Brisbane. What a ripper of a day. 29 degrees centigrade. Wow. Yes, ours is warming up a bit. I think we're about 20 today, apparently. Treatment of light and shade. An effect of contrasting light and shadow created by the falling light unevenly from a peculiar direction. Ah, right. Okay, thanks for that. I don't know how you pronounce it, but thank you for clearing that up. Along this road to Barnsley, the sun flared hugely before finally setting. All the western edges of the slag heaps were glittering. I saw in one place a great cloud of steam that had plumes of gold. In another, we passed under a vast aerial flight of coal trucks, slowly moving in deep black silhouette against the sunset. It would not have made a bad symbolical picture of the end of one phase of the industrial England. When we looked up upon Barnsley, we saw for a moment, dimly ranged about, an ebony pyramid of slag. When we stopped in the town for tea, the sun had gone and the air was nippingly cold. In the cafe where I ate my toasted tea cake, a young man was being funny to his girl about somebody's bad elocution. I suspect that somebody was a local bigwig. "He said law for law," said the young man, "and draw for draw. Honestly, he did." I guess these have got northern accents, actually. "We'll now draw up north. Hang on, I've got to get an up north. We'll now draw to a conclusion," he said. "Yes, really." And as they were in that stage of courtship in which each other finds the other's least remark a miracle of apt speech, they were very happy. Two refined but humorous souls in a wilderness of clods. It was almost dark when we left Barnsley for Huddersfield. The hills now were solidly black, their edges very sharp against the faint silver of the day. They were beginning to take on, for me, that Wordsworthian quality which belongs to the north. The factories might be roaring and steaming in the valleys, their lighted windows glaring at us as we passed, but behind those were the high remote skylines, stern enough and yet still suggesting to me a brooding tenderness. The silence that is in the starry sky, the sleep that is among the lonely hills. A road well lighted and of immense width led us to Huddersfield, which is not a handsome town, but it is famous in these parts for the intelligence and independence of its citizens. Whether they really deserve this reputation I have never been able to discover, though I know the place fairly well. We climbed from Huddersfield on our way to Bradford, to the heights of Shelf. The familiar nocturnal pageant of the West Riding was all around us. This is the region of mountaineering trams. You see them far away climbing hills like luminous beetles. You will go through mile after mile of streets, climbing all the time, and then suddenly arrive at a stretch of open country that seems nearly as wild and as cold as Greenland. From such heights you look across the hills that are constellated and twinkling with street lamps. If the towns in West Riding were brilliantly illuminated, as in Los Angeles, we would run excursions from London so that people could see these patterned hills at night. Even as it is, the spectacle has never failing charm. We ran down from Shelf, which is a place as mysterious to me as it probably is to you, into the centre of Bradford, then climbed another hill and reached our destination. I was back in my old home, and journey or no journey, there I intended to stay for the next 6 or 7 days. Just have a pause there for a moment. Poor old back is going. Oh, hello, what's this? Show and hide. I've seen somebody put in there. I've never seen that in the comments. There's 2 boxes. Let's put show. What happens there? I don't know really. Oh yeah. Chiaruscu. The Greater Billy. Good morning, Richard and Julia and everyone. Good morning to you. Loved your new vid, Julia. Oh yes, lovely. Have you done a second one, Julia? A second what do you call it, where you sing the lyrics? Lip sync thing. I know the first one came up in my YouTube channel as a recommendation, so that was really good. Right, we'll do a little bit more. I don't know how much more I should do this morning because I seem to be stumbling. My eyes are a bit blurrier today. I think because of the back pain. Right. Perhaps I should never have included Bradford in this itinerary. Obviously, I cannot visit it in the same spirit in which I visit other places. I'm not merely returning to a city I know very well, but to my childhood and youth. I left Bradford in September 1914, and I've never lived in it, only stayed in it since then. I probably got just the wrong amount of knowledge of it now, being neither citizen or a complete stranger. I'd better apologise now for everything that follows in this chapter. Nevertheless, I am determined to write it. This record would not be complete if there was not some such visit as this set down in it. I am not a citizen of this city, the Bradford of 1933. My Bradford ended in 1914. This must necessarily be a tale of 2 cities. They have much in common, and youthful memory may seize too eagerly upon what has been brought from the earlier Bradford. But I could not ignore the differences even if I wanted to. I have changed, of course, but I think the place itself has changed even more than I have. And I am not thinking now of those inevitable alterations in the appearance of the large town, the new streets where once there were old pubs and shops, the miles of semi-detached villas where I once rolled among the gigantic buttercups and daisies. These changes are more significant. A sight of them here may give us a glimpse into two Englands, two worlds. Bradford is one of those cities and towns that is the products of 19th century industrialism. In 1801, it had a population of about 1,300. In 1901, its population had risen to nearly 280,000. The only town in the country that grew faster was Middlesbrough. It was very fortunately placed for its own staple trade of worsted and woolen manufacturing. It was near some large coal fields, and, what was more important, it had an excellent supply of soft water, free from lime, and good for both washing wool and dyeing it. All the processes of worsted manufacture, combining spinning, weaving, dyeing, and finishing, are carried out in Bradford. It also deals in alpaca, mohair, and silk. Indeed, there is nothing that can be spun and woven that does not come from Bradford. I remember myself as a boy seeing some of the samples of human hair that had been sent from China. They were pigtails that had been cut off by imperial command. And there used to be one factory in Bradford that specialised in doll's hair, those crisp curls you find in the nursery cupboard. When I was a rebellious lad, I used to think that the wool office, and I was sent to one for a season, was the very symbol of the prosaic. But now I see that I was wrong. Revisiting them again, I saw these offices, with their bins of samples, blue-wrapped cylinders of hair, are really romantic. Take down some of those greasy and dusty samples, and you bring the ends of the earth together. This wool was lately wandering around our own South Downs. This comes from Argentina. This from Australia. The dust and dried dung that falls out of this packet comes from the desert. Here, in this blue paper, is hair clipped from the belly of a camel. The wools and the hairs will be sorted, scoured, combed, the long strands forming the tops, the shorts, noils, and these tops and noils, if they are not used locally, may be exported all over the place from Finland to Spain. What they will end up as, God only knows. Their adventures are terrific. Do the Bradford wool men, with their broad faces and loud voices, ever think of these things? I fancy they do, but they never mention them in public. Their talk is all of prices. You might think to hear them that they cared nothing but brass. Don't you believe them? It was after 1830 that Bradford began growing rapidly and piling up wealth. Apart from its natural advantages and the general state of trade, there was another reason for this, and that is that during the early and mid-Victorian periods, a number of German and German-Jewish merchants with German banks behind them came to settle in the town. Many of these merchants were men of liberal opinions, who knew they would be happier outside Germany. The results of this friendly invasion were very curious. Bradford became, and still remained when I was a boy there, at once one of the most provincial and yet one of the most cosmopolitan of English provincial cities. Its provincialism was largely due to a geological situation. It is really in a backwater. The railway lines went to Leeds, 10 miles away, not to Bradford, with the result that Leeds, though it has never had a worldwide reputation as that of Bradford, is a larger city and of much more greater local importance. It was Leeds and not Bradford that became the great marketing centre of the West and mid-Yorkshire. Leeds has a university and law courts. Bradford has not. I've always thought that there must be proportionately fewer university graduates in Bradford than in any other large town in England. Then again, the wool business was so much a local trade that a man might spend all his life in it, unless he happened to be sent out buying or selling, and never meet anybody but his neighbours. The city a city that has mixed trades will probably have some of its corners rubbed off. It must work with other places. But Bradford, with its one trade, was all corners, hard provincial angles. There was no mistaking a Bradford man. Moreover, Bradford was, and still is, on the edge of the moors, hardly more than a tram ride from the Pennine country. A man might spend his mornings in the wool exchange, and then spend his evenings among moorland folk, who do not do badly as characters in a medieval Wakefield nativity play. Wuthering Heights are only round one corner. The town did not gently fade away into regions decorated by land proprietors and gentlemen farmers. John Ball's old jibe, when Adam delved and Eve span, who then was the gentleman, had no application to Bradford, where everybody was busy spinning. A few were rich, but a great many were poor, working from morning till night for miserable wages. But they were all one lot of fine folk, and Jack not only thought of himself as a good master, but very often told himself so. Bradford was not only provincial, but fiercely democratic. The Independent Labour Party was born there. If having made some lucky gambles in wool, if having made some big lucky gambles in wool, you made a fortune there and determined to retire and set up as an English gentleman, you never stayed in Bradford, where everybody was liable to be very sardonic at your expense, but bought an estate a long way off, preferably in the south. I'm going to pause there because I'm reading pretty grimly today, if that's okay. And interesting is not as much of the wit and the humour in that chapter as we had previously, where he went to the Goose Fair and was the ladies' man ever, describing all those wonderful people. So sorry about that, but it's only half an hour today. But yes, I was struggling with my reading, so I do apologise about that, mainly because I think I'm having twinges in my back, and my eyes are not focusing on the text terribly clearly. So, and it's a Sunday after all, and I can take sort of a little bit of time out if I can. I've got a video to edit for this afternoon, to put out this afternoon, and another video to edit. So I've got 2 videos to edit, one for tomorrow morning, which I will space out in the day. Richard, it's not Brisbane. We say Brisbane. Brisbane? Americans say Brisbane. Oh, right, okay. Brisbane. Brisbane? Brisbane or Brisbane? Brisbane. Raymond Boo says you're doing great. Yes, thank you. Do you have a heating pad? No, I don't have anything. I don't have anything like that. I don't know if this rain we are having or what, but I can hardly move my lower back right now between a herniated disc and arthritis and fibrom something or other. Well, let's just say some days are. Yes, definitely worse than others. Yes, well, I'm probably the same there. You're taking painkillers, Richard. Got a wheat bag? No, I'm not taking any painkillers. Haven't really got any in the house. So the only thing I've got is paracetamol, and you probably need ibuprofen. But I'm just say it fast. Brisbane. Julia says I need to go shopping shortly. I'll get him some deep heat treatment if I can, and drop it in at his door. Oh, that's very kind. For me, it's like I've got to keep it moving. So sitting still is not great, but I have got to sit still and do some editing, and I can feel my voice, I think, from all this talking. So I will just take a bit of time out and try and lubricate the throat, relax the eyes, keep the back moving, And we'll have some videos a bit later on, and the Vogue show, of course, tonight. And then tomorrow, hopefully, I'll be back on form. And hopefully Mr. Priestley can amuse us a bit. He was a bit dour. Maybe it's because he's up north. He was just a bit dour, where he has amused us quite a lot in the previous chapters. So I'm hoping that he will put the zing and the zing in his, the zest in his, the zing in his step, the zest in his step, whatever. I'm struggling to be coherent myself this morning, so apologies on all fronts. Anyway, I hope that if you're over there in Brisbane, that you have a good night, and those of you in America, that you're coming up slowly towards the morning, that you have the rest of the night nice, and those of us in the UK, that we have a good day. The sun is shining here in Sussex. I am going to make a fresh cup of tea. Oh, I've got a chocolate brownie in here. I'm going to have a chocolate brownie. And I'm going to sit on my step for half an hour before I go and do my editing and just soak up some sunshine. Ouch! Oh, sorry. It's a sharp pain, but it also makes you laugh. It is the most ridiculous thing. Anyway, I will catch up with you soon. Take care. And yes, ibuprofen, it works better for inflammation of muscles and things. And I'll see you later on. Take care. All the best, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.